CHRO Walk Into a Bar, where we share insights at the intersection of talent and revenue. Dive into a unique narrative with our hosts, Michelle Strasburger, the insightful CHRO, and Dominique Sanfleur, the visionary CXO. Together, they bring dynamic perspectives that ignite thought-provoking dialogue from the C-suite. Each week, join us for electrifying sessions that confront the very challenges modern CXOs navigate in today's fast-paced business landscape. When split-second decisions loom, must it be talent or revenue that takes the hit? Or is there a harmonious crossroad where both can thrive? Can we blur the lines between talent and revenue? In every episode, we provide executive leaders with 3 strategic takeaways, transformative insights that will propel you to master the delicate balance between people and profit. It's not about winners or losers, but crafting an environment where everyone triumphs. Tune in and step closer to redefining executive success.
I love that.
I love the intro. Well done, Michelle.
I think when I write a book, I'm going to have her read it because I just like
I think it's a great voice. I love the animation too. It's engaging while listening to. Very well done on this, Michelle.
Very fun. Well, welcome to the CXO and CHRO Walk Into a Bar. Today we are talking about a topic that I'm excited to talk about. Restructuring is never a good topic, but how do you do that without losing trust? And I think that's an important topic. And that's the piece that I'm excited about talking about today. And I'm Michelle Strasburger, the CEO of HR Rebooted, where we work with organizations to build intentional cultures.
And I'm Dominique Sanfleur, CEO of Intramark. We create a data layer on culture to help organizations identify hidden risks like productivity gaps and unwanted turnover.
So today we are talking about restructuring. So I did, and I've asked Neha too in the background to share a link. So I did post an article through Star Staffing probably over a year ago on this same topic. So I wanted to share that with our listeners as well. So when you get a chance, Neha, please share that with everybody. That's another resource for people to go back to. But go ahead, jump right in, Dominique. What do you have?
No, I was just testing the water. What level? We're at the bar. We're having this conversation. What level of a beverage is this? Is this conversation for you?
I was thinking about that earlier. So my local coffee shop here just came out with lavender iced coffees, which you got to try. So I was thinking on that kind of thread, a coffee martini, but I would use the lavender. So it's calming.
Which is a good beverage, for this topic, right? We do need a calming type mood. I'm gonna stick to a safe, stable, dependable beverage, a Blue Moon of some sort for me. I think with this topic, something that's stable, something that's a breath of fresh air at some point. For me, I think Blue Moon for that. So hopefully that reflects what we'll land on for this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we've talked about in preparing for this is with restructuring is being intentional and being thoughtful with restructuring. And so we've structured this in a way to really be thoughtful. So we've kind of have 3 pillars, right? Before, during, and after. And so what do you have to really think about before restructuring to build trust? What do you have? No potpourri in my beverage, says, welcome, Tina. Good with the martini part. I love it. I'm telling you, the lavender sounds weird, but it's good.
Okay, I believe you.
But then what do you have to do during? I think, and then what do you do after? I think it's very critical to plan it out and think about it and not rush into any of those pieces if you want to keep trust during this process.
And, it might be a somewhat of a silly question, but I think it's worth asking, why is maintaining trust during restructuring especially important? You know, why does this matter? I guess I'd love to get your perspective, Michelle.
Yeah, I think it matters on a lot of levels, right? Your culture changes after restructuring, and you want to keep the people that stay, I assume, right? In most organizations, you want to keep the people that stay. And the people that stay are going through their own kind of grief process. It is like grief, right? You have survivor syndrome after you go through a layoff. If you survive, why did I stay? Why did my counterpart? And you look around and you're not part of that decision as an employee, right? You look around and you see your counterparts that have left and you're like, wow, Sally was phenomenal. She was well liked. She was a great performer, came to work every day. She did her job. Why me? Why did she go and I'm still here? And so there's some of that. And then there's concern from the employee that they might be next. You know, if Sally was let go, I'm probably on the list, right? There's got to be a list somewhere. I'm probably on the list. And so I might start looking. And so I think being able to build trust is important to retain people. I think it's also important to be able to move forward and rebuild quickly, and to be able to build momentum.
I think you hit it on the head, Michelle. You know, as I think about this, right, trust during this process, because it's one of those really defining moments for an organization, and how quickly you bounce back and how quickly you recover and how quickly you move forward to efficiently serving customers and growth really matters. It really matters how you handle that situation, because I think you mentioned it very, very succinctly. Your culture changes. The organization as a quote unquote person changes going forward, and what you change into matters, right? What you change into going forward is going to really determine, you know, who you are, how you move in the market going forward. And so if not handled well, right, your perception in the market, your perception with the employees that you depend on who remain changes. And, you know, that discretionary effort from those employees may go up or may go down, depending on, you know, how you handle this process. And so how you're competitive going forward matters. You know, your culture is going to contribute to that. And what's contributing to your culture is, you know, the decisions that you've made during the restructuring process. And so all of that comes together. So I think that's definitely a big reason why trust matters and why this topic matters quite a bit.
And just by doing a restructuring, you're losing trust. Just the process of doing that, it's a natural thing that you're losing trust. And so doing all the things you can to rebuild that quickly is important.
And, you know, part of that is because the reputation of what a restructuring is, it's never a good thing, right? So many organizations have not handled that process well, so that once it's clear that your organization is going through it, really the stigma is, you know, one, it's not a fun situation to begin with, right? It's not a desirable situation to begin with. But the stigma is typically, you know, when organizations show the most that they don't care about people, right? That's the perception, that's the reputation that restructurings have, because there's a lot of precedents out in the market of just restructurings not handled well, or not handled with care, not handled with trust, or not handled humanely. And so that you know, you as an organization, once you're going through restructuring, automatically that's very bad branding, right? That's very bad perception. So you already have an uphill battle to climb or to overcome in maintaining trust. And that trust matters. Had a previous conversation on this. That trust matters, you know, not just how you treat the employees who are leaving, but it's also the employees who are staying are observing this, right? And going forward, how they, you know, develop the perception of the organization going forward and how they contribute, you know, to the culture going forward, and the organization in general is going to matter. So what should we be thinking about before restructuring to make sure that we set the right pace for trust as we're going through this process. I have a few thoughts, Michelle, but I turn it to you when you kick us off.
I worked for a company and I was junior in my career. I was an HR manager, an area HR manager back then. And it used to just make me so upset. And I actually left the company for this reason, is that every year in December, they did a big layoff. You have to let go of your bottom 13% in December. No rhyme or reason. But they were still doing holiday parties. They were still ordering tchotchkes and t-shirts and supplies, and they were still doing all the things. And it just broke my heart. And I was the one having to let people go because I was the local HR person. So at the holidays, I'm driving around and letting people go. And it wasn't a good reason other than just for the numbers at the end of the year. And so I think, organizations should really, before they decide, they make that firm decision to do layoffs or restructuring, I think they should look at all the things. What are all the other things we're spending money on? And what could we really do without before we look at people? Right? There are organizations we've all heard of, right? Where their executive teams have taken pay cuts. I remember back when the economy, I think it was pre-2008, we had one of the recessions. Southwest, the pilots and the flight attendants were cleaning the planes so that they could turn the planes around quicker, so that people wouldn't lose jobs. Like, what are the things that you can do so you don't have to go down this road? I think that's the first step when you're thinking about restructuring, is like, what are the things you can do without first?
I totally agree. You get these examples of, hey, we just did a layoff and the organization spends an exorbitant amount of money on some kind of holiday party right after, or something like that, where they're being very, during a restructuring or in general around that time, being not just conscious about spending, because that's the obvious, but the perception of your spending as well. It may not be a lot of spending, but if it looks, to be something that's unnecessary, an unnecessary investment, it'll be very, very much interpreted where the organization's values lie, because where your dollars go is kind of a vote on where your priorities are. And so you don't want to send the signal that, to your point, Michelle, that you haven't considered everything else that you could possibly cut before you decide to cut, within your workforce, right? Which impacts livelihoods and whatnot. So I think in that same vein is, and this goes to a conversation I had previously with Michael Arisman. He was on one of our earlier LinkedIn Lives. Also looking at open roles, right? Whenever someone leaves a role voluntarily, his recommendation is that use that as an opportunity to revisit that role and whether or not it should exist, right? And this is within a restructuring or even outside of restructuring. He looks at it as just a new opportunity to reevaluate whether or not that role, instead of that gut reaction just to backfill, that's an opportunity to really scrutinize whether or not that role needs to exist. And what you'll have naturally is that with your natural attrition rate, you could use that to supplement part of that restructuring spend, if you will, right? If you're gonna potentially lay off 100 people, but naturally you're seeing an attrition of 10 people, really look at those roles that may not need to exist. But related to that, and it relates to the conversation I had with Michael Arisman as well during the previous LinkedIn Live, is to first decide what is it that the organization is going to stop doing. Going into a restructuring situation, what you don't want to do is do all the same level of work that you're doing now, but with fewer people. Because that's just going to exacerbate a really tough situation, right? You're going to burn out people. You're going to increase their workload. It's going to increase burnout, and and that's not productive either. So related to that is understanding and deciding what the organization is not going to do going forward, and start to restructure according to what your priorities are and what you're going to let go of from an activity perspective as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think Gerardo brings up a good comment. I can't pull it up for some reason, but I don't know if you can see it on your side. When you make the decision to cut deep, and that goes to that point, Dominique, that you were saying of, make the decision on what you're not going to do, and then cut there and cut deep so that you're not cutting and then cutting again and then cutting again. And I also, we might be jumping to like what to do then, but Dan, I think this is a great comment. Thank you for sharing this. Is, it was tough not being able to warn someone who was being restructured, right? As leaders, this is so hard not to share it with people. I think you have to think about your strategy ahead of time too. Like, how are we going to communicate this? Are we going to communicate with people? Are we going to hold this close to our chest? How are we going to tell people? What's the mode of communication? It was much easier in another situation where he was being restructured and he got the heads up so he could plan. It's never easy, but giving people notice and giving them time, and even maybe giving people the opportunity to volunteer for a restructure gives them a little bit more peace of mind to what's going on, and some time to digest it, and helps build that trust. Like, I had the opportunity to actually take it in. And actually you're telling somebody also that you trust them with the information, right? I trust that you can handle this information and be professional.
I think that's key. There's several things that I want to come back on this. One is the cut deep comment, and then two is treating people as adults. So I think now, are we still in the bucket of what to do before or what to do during?
I think we're still in what to do before. So
right.
What to do before. So we're cutting deep. Also, we got to think about communication, which we brought up.
100%.
How we're going to communicate.
Yeah, I think both those topics are super, super important. Again, relates to a previous conversation I've had, is the comment on cutting deep is so, so important. Cutting a little bit deeper than you think is necessary. Although that is, you would want to save as many roles as possible, right? And I think sometimes that's a very noble thing to do, and a very good reaction. However, if you don't cut deep enough and you find yourself next quarter and the numbers are missed again and you're cutting again, and then next quarter your numbers are soft again, you're cutting again, that becomes part of culture itself. And just put yourself, and I think we've known people or been in situations like this. The employees spend more time thinking about if they're next than they are doing work. So it's a disastrous situation to put an organization in, where you're cutting incrementally over time rather than doing one deeper cut than you probably need to, but doing it at once so that there's a sigh of relief as quickly as possible. Because part of that, again, that incremental cutting and that uncertainty, that environment now becomes part of culture. Now becomes, we're the organization that we just don't know what we're doing. And the people that you don't want to lose are likely going to leave in that situation. So I really like the comment about cutting deep, because I think there are probably a lot of case studies out there where organizations decided to cut incrementally or do like this annual cut. I don't think that's a productive contribution to culture.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, and around the communication piece, communicating with people like as if they're adults is necessary. But there's a quote that I ran into in an article that I wanted to share around communication. Right? It says branding isn't just about logos and colors. It's about the story your actions tell. And so a lot of the communication that happens is not just the communications that you actually tell people. It's about your actions as well. So handling this process really communicates a lot through action. And there's another quote yes, a lot of this isn't planned, but what defines a brand is how you communicate around these issues. And so if we jump a little bit deeper on communication, what does that look like during a restructuring? What should, it's tricky, right? You don't have a lot of information. You don't want to cause a panic, but at the same time, communicating is the best. What is the strategy? What does that look like? What should an organization be thinking about?
I think if you are really working on building trust with your team, I think it needs to be authentic, and it shouldn't be a surprise. Like, you shouldn't be communicating to your organization that's all roses, right? And then do a restructuring next month. And so if you're in this phase where you're starting to see things going south, right? We're in this time in this country where we have a lot of headwinds right now. That economy is unsure. There are some new costs ahead of us that companies are facing. We're challenged with getting people in roles. So we have a lot of headwinds, and I think it's totally fair for CEOs at your town halls to stand up and say, "Look, we're not meeting our numbers. We've got some headwinds." But I think you have to tell people, like, here's the plan, here's what we're doing, and get them excited. I think CEOs are afraid to do that because they're afraid people are going to start running for the hills, right? And I get that. I get people are afraid, like, you're afraid you're going to just scare people off. But good leaders will get people behind a rallying cry, will get people motivated for it. But if you're just everything's roses and then you lay people off, like, you're destroying trust, because then the people that stay are not going to believe the rallying cry then going forward. So I think you've got to have you've got to be communicating along the way, even if you don't have a good story, like a great story to tell, because it's not always going to be great.
I agree.
And then I think you have to figure out the way you're going to communicate. And I think it's really important, right? We all saw Google send out thousands of emails to people laying them off, and we all shook our heads from a distance and said, that's absolutely unacceptable, especially all my HR folks on this call. And so I think you need to make sure that whoever, and Tina asked the question, like, what leadership levels should you get involved? I think whatever level is necessary so that they understand the message, they understand the why, and they can deliver that message effectively in order to build trust. They need to be brought in early and often so that they can communicate that message to the people that are affected, and the people that stay, they can carry that.
Taking that example that you just mentioned, Michelle, where, especially larger organizations, right? They have a lot of people, you're going through a restructuring process, a lot of people involved, right? Potentially a good amount of layoffs, thousands, right? If not email that's getting sent through, and I totally agree, I don't recommend that approach. How would you recommend an organization go about communicating to those who are affected? Right? What does best practice look like, for communicating to those who are affected? Hey.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from the audience. I haven't worked for an organization where I've had to lay off thousands of people. I would say that you might need to phase it, right? And start like maybe a follow the sun approach, and bring in those leaders, bring in the HR leaders that are at the ground level that are meeting with these individuals, and do one-on-one group sessions, things like that, as much as you can do face-to-face as possible. I spoke with a gentleman who was at the company for 18 years, and he got an email. Like, that doesn't feel good.
It's a lack of, that's a lack. Sorry to cut you off, Michelle.
No, you're good. You're good.
No, I was going to say that example of being at an organization for that long, and then the way they choose to part ways via email, that does show a lack of respect, and that's not something that you would want an organization to do to your son, your daughter, your brother, your sister. To do it to someone's brother, daughter, sister, son, whatever it may be. That's just not a level of respect that we want to be part of general culture in our society. So I think what you mentioned, as much as possible, it becomes a lot tougher when it's involved, when it involves thousands of employees. But finding, part of what we could be thinking about before is a strategy of how to have one-on-ones, in-persons at scale. Especially with those who are impacted, and even those who aren't impacted. to make sure you have that communication strategy in place that is face-to-face. Usually what's most efficient is not the best strategy for for things that are the most sensitive, right? So if something's super sensitive, you almost have to pick the most inefficient approach in order to deal with that situation properly. Efficiency is great for where human impact isn't, a lot of human quote unquote impact isn't driven. But for sensitive situations like this, I highly recommend and I highly agree with one-on-ones in person as much as possible.
Yeah, Gerardo, I think you hit the nail on the head. Let the department leaders and HR reps do them by teams, and then follow up with a company town hall meeting to address it and what the plan is to move forward. If the smaller amount of people, try one-on-ones. Yep, I think one-on-ones, if it's a small amount of people, is probably the first thing. Remember, the outcome we're trying to get here is to build trust, right? If you're not trying to build trust, an email is fine. But remember, some people don't check their email. So
they might show up the next day.
Find out for a while.
They might be still working on that project.
What's the outcome you're trying to do? If you're trying to build trust, I think Gerardo was right. You have to have that human approach, and you have to do that. And I think then you can go to your town hall as the CEO or the CHRO, and look at the rest of your team in the face, the ones that have stayed, and said, we've tried to do this in the most humane way possible. And this is how we're going to move forward. And this is the team that's key to help us do that moving forward. Now I'm jumping way ahead to what we're going to do next. But I think, I think we're in the what do you do? How do you do it? I think that's the way to do it. I think you've got to figure out, no matter how big your organization is, how to do it in a humane way. And I think another way to do it is to ask for volunteers, right? If you've been honest about the state of the business and you've been transparent, there may be people that are willing to say, hey, I'm willing to take a package, or I'm looking at retirement in a few months. Like, I'm willing to go a little bit earlier to help you out. And, you might be surprised by who raises their hands.
I totally agree, Michelle, because, I think that's a very important reminder, right? It's not only about showing people respect in a very, very tough situation, right? But it's also communicating to the people who are remaining who you are and as an organization, because what you're depending on going forward is their contribution, is their energy after a very tough situation, right? So you've had to do a restructuring, and inevitably layoffs is part of that. And now you're turning around, you have to ask the remaining people to give that discretionary effort so that the organization continues to be, competitive in an environment. That is not an easy ask of humans, right? And so part of that strategy to make sure you maintain trust with the people who have left or are leaving and the people who remain, I think it's a both communication strategy, of course, but why it's important, again, you have to, the organization's got to get back in the ring as quickly as possible to compete. And you're only going to be able to lean on the people that you have trust with still. If you break that trust, and they see that how you treated the people outgoing with just an email or, not a lot of consideration, asking for that discretionary effort from the people who remain is going to be almost impossible. So I think that's one of the things that's thanks for mentioning that. Mm-hmm. Let's jump into the after, if you're ready for that. So we touched on what to do before. We touched on a few things as far as what's before, cutting as much fluff as possible before you consider the people, understanding what you're going to stop doing, right? What is the organization not going to do going forward, given the restructuring, and then plan the restructuring around that, reevaluating open roles, and then what to do during, considering things like a deeper cut, maybe than potentially necessary to get it out the way, not consecutive cuts, and then doing the restructuring process, potentially inevitably the layoff process humanely, ideally with one-on-ones, as part of your communication strategy to maintain trust and offer people that level of transparency as much as possible. Now, what do we do after?
I've also seen organizations do job fairs. So in Dan's instance, where they told people this was going to happen and that they gave them time, they've invited other companies in to actually recruit their people. And they've given them transition packages, which included resume building, coaches, things like that, to help them, not just like, I'll pay for your unemployment or I won't fight your unemployment, like real tangible things to help them transition. There are resources out there, or consultants and coaches like that can help people through those times and help them rewrite their resume, help them interview, help them find jobs. And so I think, what their story, that what they're going to tell the other employees that stay, is also going to help build trust. And so if they're telling stories like, yeah, it sucks, I got let go, but they really did help. And they gave me, like, they paid for this like $5,000 coach so that I can like get like redo my resume and find a job. Like, they really like went out of their way to help in whatever way that is, I think is really helpful. And then I think afterwards, having a communication style or communication strategy and communicating often and regularly, and even if you don't have the answer, right? I think we always want to like have this perfect communication, and we always want to send a perfect message. And I think people want to hear, even if you don't have the perfect message, they want to know, like, I don't have all the answers yet, but we're going to figure it out together, right? And we're going to get through it together. And today, here's what we're doing today. Here's what we're doing tomorrow. Here's what the next week looks like, but we're getting through it. So I think communicating as much as you can, staying close to people. I think Gerardo makes a great point too. Don't commit to not doing layoffs, right? I think you can commit the plan. Like, we made the decision to cut all these things. We're not going to focus on that. And we cut really deep so that we don't have to do future layoffs. This is the direction we're going, but don't commit to not doing them again, because then when you do them again, you're breaking trust. And then I would also give space to people that they're grieving, right? We talked about this earlier. They are in a space of like, they're having that survivor guilt, and they need space, whether it's one-on-ones with HR. So having office hours, having roundtable discussions, bringing in your EAP, whatever resources you have available, having time with the CEO to ask questions, maybe even have like a question box or an anonymous question. A prompt app would be great. If you know anybody that offers one of those, Dominique.
Who knows?
Where you can just check in with people on a daily basis. I think a lot of companies, they do the restructuring and then it's business as usual, and people are like, but what? But I'm coming back to an empty desk next to me every day, and it's like it's like, well, I lost a loved one, right? It is a big change in people's lives, and we have to make space for that.
And Michelle, to build on that, I think oftentimes what gets lost, especially in restructuring decisions, because what's happening in a room where who to let go, who not to let go, is how that decision's being made is usually behind behind a spreadsheet, right? And what actually happens on the ground is, to your point, that person that they socialized with and they're spending 8 hours a day with, right, is no longer there. Or, they went through also themselves a huge mental tax of not knowing and all of that uncertainty. And so, you're translating decisions that you're making from a spreadsheet that impact how people, spending 8 hours a day at work is a significant part of people's lives, right? Part of their social aspect. And so going into restructuring with that in mind and knowing that up front really, 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 really does matter, as well as there's definitely human impact to this. And one thing to add on the communication front as well, I think that would be important, is to, it kind of coordinates or connects with what not to do, what we're not going to do going forward. communicating that to employees as well, because as people are getting restructured or unfortunately laid off, you want to make it clear to the remaining people that as much as possible, we're not just going to be doing the same amount of things with just fewer people, as long as, you know, people have a clear understanding that we have fewer people, but there are also fewer things that we will be doing, is going to be a helpful communication strategy as well.
I think that's key. And I think never underestimating the human impact is key too, because you may have somebody who complains about Joe who sits next to them, and then you're like, oh, they'll be happy Joe's gone. They will be just as upset that Joe's gone. And you can't underestimate that human effect of when somebody gets let go, even if they didn't always get along in the workplace. I think that's really important.
And
the communication piece, that communication piece is just as important when you're doing restructuring as when you're not backfilling a role. So I think I like the idea you talked about earlier of not backfilling a role as a kind of silent restructuring. And I think that's a strategic way to look at it, of like, we don't need to refill this role. But I think that communication needs to happen, because if you have people that see that you're not backfilling the role, but you're not talking about it, they're making their own assumptions. Then there's a reason they're not backfilling this role. They don't want to spend the money. They just want a bigger bottom line. They just care about the money. They don't care about us. And so you have to craft that message, because when you don't craft the message, there's a message that's already made, and that's not the message you want.
And Michelle, it relates to what you said earlier as well. It's especially for those who are leaving, the story they tell to the people who are remaining really, really matters quite a bit. And that's going to be part of culture, and that's going to be part of the communication strategy that's unintentional, right? So there's a communication strategy that you control, but also there's communication that you don't control. And so how you handle this process with trust, if the story that's being told about the process is, hey, they treated me with respect and dignity, and, they actually, tried to take care of me on the way out. For the people who are remaining, if they hear that, when they hear that, not if, that's super, super beneficial to get that level of discretionary effort back up in the company, the organization back competitive in the market. But if the story's the other way, people will very readily listen to other former / employees than they will leadership, oftentimes. And so again, communicating through actions as well is going to matter, because people will form stories and fill in the blanks as well, so that all of this matters. Yeah.
And then when you start hiring again, make sure that you're being intentional about it, and you're being thoughtful that it fits with the strategy, and it doesn't just start to fill back. And then could you then hire back some of the people that you let go? I think that tells a great story for people when you're bringing them back.
That's a very good point. It's about how do you create a generally great story around, as good of a story as possible, around a very, a traumatic event, right? And I think that's another great strategy, is to consider those who were previously let go. There may be some new roles that they could be reconsidered for. And so if some of those employees come back, that's again another great story that will get told about your organization, inside the organization and outside of it. So it's about all collecting these as positive as much as possible stories as you can about this traumatic event.
Yep. So I think our nuggets for building trust during restructuring.
Go ahead. Do you want me to do it? Okay, got it.
Unless you have others. We'll see if I got.
No, go for it. I thought you wanted me to read it.
This is the test. It could be a function face-off. Be strategic, be human, and communicate.
Nicely put, nicely condensed, nicely simplified.
Did I hit yours?
You did a much better job than me. I was going to go more, much more tactical, into the different, but you summarized it in a very nice framework: is be strategic, be human, and communicate. That's all it is.
Sounds good. Until next week.
You got it. Michelle, thank you so much. Neha, thank you so much in the background.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I saw some rebels out there. I appreciate you being loud. Thanks, everyone.